So Patrick is asking, what is behind the story when Jesus uses spit and dirt to make mud that was put on the blind man's eyes to heal him?
Patrick, that's a really great question. I actually really love this story about Jesus. When he heals the blind man, he there's a few stories of Jesus healing the blind, but one specific where Jesus spits and uses dirt combined together. And so we'll kind of go through the story really quick. The story is found in the book of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. So we'll go to the story first for reference, and then I'll kind of just share what I think based on some other references from the Bible. So let's go to John chapter 9. And like I said, verses 1 through 8 is where the story happens. And so here we read in John chapter 9, verse 1, it says, "And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth." And then it says, "And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?'" So the context of this story is that the disciples see a blind man and they ask him, is he blind because he sinned or did his parents sin? As if the cause of his blindness could have only been because of sin. And so Jesus goes on to say, in verse 3, it says, "Jesus answered, 'Neither has this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him.'" And as you keep reading in verses 4 through the rest of the story, it says, "I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night comes when no man can work." So Jesus is saying, I have a work to do here for this specific man. And in verse 5, Jesus says, "As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." So Jesus is declaring who he is through this situation. And verse 6, Jesus says, "When he had um, thus spoken, he spat or spit on the ground, and he made clay of the spittle." So basically, of the spit and the dirt together, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And then in verse 7, Jesus goes on to say, "And said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is interpreted as sent. The meaning of this name is sent. "He went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing." And so, and then verse 8, it says, "The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him that was blind, said, Is not he that sat and begged?" So here's basically the conclusion of this is that everybody who had seen this man knew that he was a beggar because he was blind, and said, were an eyewitness to this miracle, that they saw a man they knew was born blind, they knew he begged, become seeing through the miracle of Jesus, in this way. Now, like I said, there's many other ways that Jesus had healed people who were blind. I mean, he could touch people. He would in one instance, he just put spit alone on the man's eyes. And in some cases, like in one case, a man who was blind, saw in phases. His sight was restored in phases. But in this case, for this specific man, Jesus puts a little bit of dirt and a little bit of spit and makes a clay and puts it on his eyes. And honestly, what comes to my mind when I read this story is basically um, that it's very similar to the creation story. Now, Jesus is our creator. We know that from John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 and 14. Jesus is our creator. And so Jesus almost makes a recreation for this man. He makes a little bit of he gets the dirt of the earth and his spit. And in essence, spit comes out when air comes out. And when you think of, how Jesus made Adam at creation, he formed him from the dust of the earth and he breathed the breath of life into him. And I feel like in this case, this is a recreation for this specific man that Jesus had designated for this miracle. And just like Jesus said, because I wanted to point this out at the beginning of it, is that, the point of this story is that Jesus is trying to teach his disciples at his time, as well as, for all future generations, that, sometimes people are born with this, an infirmity, with a sickness, with something that's just kind of not fair in a way. Sometimes we suffer things, and it's not because we sinned or our parents did something wrong. It's just that, we're born with a weakness. And Jesus says he has this thing so that the glory of God, the works of God should be manifest in him. And I think that's just kind of a truth that Jesus wants us to understand in this story, that we all have something, some sort of weakness, some sort of uh, barrier that keeps us from being our best self. And the only way that we can become that better self, that we can find healing, that we can find grace, is through Jesus doing a recreation in our hearts. And I feel like we see this kind of through, we see this even in David when he had sinned with Bathsheba. And you read that beautiful chapter in Psalm 51 where he says, "Create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me." That word, create in me, is that same word create as in Genesis 1:1, where it says, God created the heavens and the earth. It's that same Hebrew word. And so I feel like, again, this is just God, Jesus saying that we all need a recreation. We need to be born again, like he talks about in John chapter 3. And just really quick, when it talks about Jesus, doing this, I think that the deeper spiritual meaning, again, is a spiritual recreation. And I'm trying to see, or really quick, there's a verse in Colossians I want to close with for this, because I feel like this is the point that Jesus wants to drive home, is that, yes, he can heal your physical blindness, but the spiritual blindness that was the case for, the Jewish nation during his time, that was the real healing that he needed to bring about, and the real recreation that we all need in his time and in ours. And you see this in Colossians chapter 3, verses 8 through 10. So I'll close with these verses. Colossians chapter 3, verses 8 through 10. And it reads here. All right, sorry. It says, "But now you also put off these things: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not to one another, seeing you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man." In verse 10, "You have put on the new man, which is renewed in the knowledge after the image of him that created him." And just as Jesus says, in Genesis 1, that we are created in the image of God, we need to be recreated into Christ's image. And the only way we can put off those old ways and get rid of our spiritual blindness is by Jesus doing a recreation in our hearts and in the souls and our soul's eyes, in a way. So I hope that answers your question, and I just pray that you continue to study God's word and see the beautiful truths that are there, that maybe they're not always so visible, but when you start reading and digging, you see a little bit more there.